At long last, I'm making the movement tutorial. And since then, my mic quality might be a little better than it was last time. But anyway, howdy, it's Enforma, and today we're gonna be doing some stuff involving movement in SFM. This is just gonna go over the basics. This is not a tutorial on how to do movements like I do them. This is just a little tutorial. So if you're new to SFM, this will probably help you out more than people that have been using it for a year or so. But anyway, let us get on with things. First up, we're going to be setting up the scene, or the shot, whichever you want to call it. So there's a few prerequisites to animating your scene. You gotta have it composed first to a degree. Like here, I've already kind of done it just to kind of save some time, but there are some other things I'm going to do first. I kind of want to pose his fingers a little bit, so we're gonna go into the motion editor to do that instead of the graph editor, or else we'll be creating useless keyframes that we are not wanting. Something else that can help you out here is if you right click within the orange circle, rotation mode, local, and then you can use the lasso by holding control, rotating around the bones, and doing as such. You'll be grabbing multiple bones this way. And this can be very useful. Again, do this all in the motion editor. We'll get into the graph editor right now, actually. So, this is important. This is a huge thing if you're wanting to get with your animation. So, we're going to go into graph editor now. And let's actually stretch out this a little more. And first, you're going to want to click on what you're wanting to animate, and then press M. This will create keyframes for every single bone within the body. Because if you have, for example, let's have the hand. Let's say you make a keyframe all the way out here. What are you going to do with that? There's no movement before here, so let's actually create a movement here. You got no movement, and it's just moving kind of awkwardly. You're not getting that life going into this. So, yeah, you're going to want to have the animation start at the beginning of the shot. So, pressing M should do that for you. Next up, we're going to go into the basics of the movement. So, let's disable our lighting here right now, and let's take a closer look at the timeline here. So, there's a few ways you can go along with this. You got your playhead right here. You can move that along as such to go along your timeline. You can hit the arrow keys. You can up, down. Those are pretty much the ways that you can move things around. You can hold that, press space, any which way you feel. But the way I like to do it, the left and right keys, which allow you to jump one keyframe at a time. So we're going to be animating him kind of clenching a fist. We're going to mostly be playing around with the forearm in this, so let us jump a few keyframes to the right. Have that. And then we're going to do that. Now, what you're going to see, it's way too fast. So, let's move these a little bit so we can have some room. Now, it's important to make sure that you move around your keyframes if things are looking a little too snappy or if they're looking a little too sluggish. You got to try to find that comfort zone. And another important thing that I like doing here, because right here, this is when the movement ends. Let's add a bone with some light movement, and then have it move in the opposite direction. You got a little bit of a bounce there. And that can be quite nice. So, now with space, you just space, you move, you space, you move, you space, you move, you space, you move. It's not going to be as exact, and sometimes you might get something that looks a little bit, I don't have an example here, but like, for example, you might have a keyframe that is right before, like, you'd have to zoom in, and you want to delete that. What will happen there is you might have a movement like this, and it'll snap like that. So, if you notice something like that, you've got a doubled keyframe, so make sure to be on the look for that. So, anyway, excuse me. We have our little bit of basic movement here, and you can see it over here. You can, I don't know an exact way to do that, but you see it on the motion editor. You can check all the lines, making sure they're not too like up, down, all over the place. Make sure your lines look clean, because the cleaner it is, usually that's the smoother it is. So I'm going to go on to the next point in the video real quick. Since we kind of already went over keyframing, let's go over moving multiple bones at the same time. I showed you how to do the lasso before, so what we're going to do is we're going to grab these fingers, or this finger. And this doesn't apply with some models, like if you try to rotate right there, it's rotating fine. But sometimes you have models that'll rotate like that. At that point, I would just animate like, probably like this or something. But anyway, let us lasso. And with this, I would suggest either the spacebar method. Sometimes it could be hard to grab. But yeah, you can grab multiple bones. You can do that. You can do that. You can also rotate around like this. Pressing R to get into this, by the way. E to get here. W to get here. Just going over those again. And hopefully I'm being helpful, because this is the tutorial that I was anticipating being the most dreadful, because I don't have a good way to explain this, but we're just gonna kind of go along and work on this until we got something simple that we like. And I'll go over some of the other basics afterwards, like some very important things for animating a character. Even though it's not on the list, I'm gonna go over it anyway. So even though I'm animating the fingers right here, a key thing to do if you're animating the character, make sure you animate as much as you can, because I see a lot of people and they'll animate just the neck, they'll animate just the torso. Like the torso, or the pelvis, this is the root of everything. This is where everything comes from. So you're going to want to start from the pelvis, then have the movement move into the torso with some of the physics remaining from the pelvis. Then that's whenever you go into moving the arms, you have it follow mostly the torso, and the neck usually follows the torso with some independent movements of its own, and the head usually follows the neck. So I know I kind of just briefly went over that, but I don't really have a good way to explain it. It just helps a lot making your animation look less stiff, like this one currently is, just because all we have right here, even though I'm not following one of the points that I already said, I don't have anything else animated, so we'll get to that later. So we're just gonna finish animating the fist here. And it's a simple little animation. Nothing great, but it's definitely serviceable. Even though this is barely a fist, we can make some tweaks along the way to make it look better. You can get rid of this keyframe here, delete. And voila. So what we can do now, we can go into this and have it like just kind of act like it's the reason, it's the root of where all that's coming from. And then you do so with the torso, the pelvis, etc., etc. So anyway, I'm going on to the next point, because the next one is pretty important, so I remember. I don't remember the list. And my memory serves me correct, because it is scaling. I don't know if I went over this before, but either way, I'm going over it again. Scaling, it's a key component of SFM. And it usually helps out your animations quite a bit sometimes. Like, oh, hey, there's something I want to kind of emphasize in this scene, like maybe the hands all up close or something. Maybe you don't want something in your scene, like you'll want to make it smaller or bigger, which can be animated, by the way. So let's go to the mask, add scale control to transforms, bam. We're going to have the mask kind of pop in and out. So yeah, his mask is kind of gone, and kind of like what we had before. he got his mask coming in. I'm not gonna keep that. That was just a kind of demonstration because I didn't really have anything else for scaling. But that I had something that I was going to say that was gonna be important, but I already forgot what I was going to say. But it'll probably come back to me eventually. I'm sorry. I didn't know how I was gonna do this tutorial, so I'm trying my best. So please understand. Yes, something a little more on the nose that I can actually explain. Then this is the types of keyframes. While I haven't played with them all, some of them are definitely useful. Down here, where you got your play button, your record button, it's all that other stuff. You got these right here, which are all your tangents, which are types of keyframes. So, by default, SFM should have it in this one right here, the spline tangent. But what you can do, we can play, you get your general idea of how that looks. So let's grab his arms. Let's grab all that. Make sure you select all the keyframes. And let's make it linear. Not much different, but it can definitely serve its purpose sometimes. But yeah, all of these affect like how things look. This isn't the best example because, well, I'll show you. The main one that I use for animations, the step tangent. It pretty much moves it exactly as the keyframes move, so it can be quite useful for some things, especially if you animate in, well, step by step, or whatever it's called, blocking. Yeah. So you can play around with those. You get different kinds of results. They can definitely be very useful in some situations. Sometimes they won't be so useful, but personally, I most of the time stick to spline. But if you're trying to do something like robotic movements, maybe you'll want to go to something like a flat tangent. Like, let me actually do something right here. I'm going to move the torso, and we're going to have a few keyframes and then empty. Usually for spline, that would create a bounce. But if you have anything else, you got yourself a flat tangent, and you won't get that much of a bounce. With a linear tangent, it's just gonna directly do that. Step tangent, pretty much the same as before. This, pretty much step tangent again. The rest, they do what they do, but most of them feel fairly similar, so I just like to stick with flat, linear, spline, and step tangents. And hopefully those will help you out with some things in the future. Sliders. Okay, this is something I'm not going to go in too depth about because this isn't something I'm going to go too in depth about, just because all sorts of models have all sorts of sliders for things like lip sync, eye movement, etc. I'll go in that in a separate kind of tutorial, which will probably use different kinds of models because it's a whole beast in of itself for like model sliders. But there are sliders over here, and some of them are pretty cool. Like, you want to go to your camera, you see this little thing next to some procedural sliders. You got lenses. You got all sorts of different lenses that are used to replicate the looks of actual cameras, which I find pretty cool. I actually learned about this fairly recently, so it can be quite useful, I think. Anyway, the main thing I'm focusing on here are the procedural sliders, which, well, sometimes they break, sometimes that's an example of one breaking. I don't know what most of these do, but giving some of the basic knowledge that I have on the important ones, I'd say important ones to follow are ones like playhead. You see, you got all these lines and stuff down here on your timeline. You don't want that. Playhead. The movement's gone. You want to kind of half it? Let's have our torso movement here. Let's playhead about 50%. You got a lighter movement. You want it to just be in this area. Playhead. Because playhead pretty much just focuses everything about where the playhead is right now. Another important one, you got your jitter. Now, people in the SFM FNAF community love this one a lot because it makes them all shaky. It makes them shaky boys, and a shaky boy is a great boy. So let's jitter them up a little bit. Yeah, I think you can get the idea of what jitter does. Jitter can be used pretty well, though. As you can see, a little plus sign right here, you press plus. The rotation, you can set a certain rotation, which you can see which each one does. Let's go to X, because that will just rotate him like such, and jitter that way. So he's only going to be jittering a bit side to side, other than all the other directions. And play with that as you wish, because it's quite helpful sometimes, but not all the time, because sometimes it can look kind of bad. But anyway, another important slider that we can deal with here is, I forgot what stagger does, but anyway, smooth. You want to smooth out your movements. You feel they're a little too rough, or if you want to just smoothen something, smooth. You see, you got your movements a little smooth, but I wouldn't say rely. I would say don't rely on this one, just because if you rely too much on it and you need to go back to edit your bones, things are going to be a bit of a problem, because it's best to smooth everything out once than one at a time, so you can get things looking consistent. And don't use too much smoother. Your animations, they'll just look kind of dead, I suppose. Also, sliders can only be done in the motion editor. But anyway, yeah, I'm not too knowledgeable on all the other sliders, so if you want to, go play around with those, and maybe you'll learn something. Play with some model sliders. Sometimes you can get some really important ones, and sometimes you'll get some really useless ones. But anyway, let's move on to the next point. Okay, first I want to apologize. I'm sorry if this tutorial isn't the best. I'm trying my best, but there are probably some better tutorials out here. But anyway, we're going to go into IK rigging. Also, key note about the thing I said before, if you play head, your bones are going to stay there. So you might want to get rid of those. We're going to talk about IK rigging, though. We're going to work with this hand, and there are different kinds of IK rigs you can play around with. There are some there are two that I'd recommend: the universal IK rig and the IK constraints. I'm going to play with the IK. I'm going to play with both of them, just because they're both just as important as one another. So we're going to right click. We're going to go over rig, universal V3. And you're going to see the types of bones have changed, because bones have changed. And you see, you still got your lines, you still got everything, but as soon as you move stuff, yeah, don't try to finalize your movements before you throw IK in there. Unless it's like, I'm not sure. Just try to be careful. But anyway, an important thing about IK rigs, your hands, they're going to stay there. Your feet, they're going to stay there. So if you're needing something, like if you got your hand on the wall and you kind of wanting him to lean up on something, that's where IK rigs can come in handy. You need him to hold on to his head, that's where IK rigs come in handy. But enough with that, because I don't want to lock him up too much. You can Control Z to revert that, but for an IK constraint, you're going to click the bone, you're going to DAG's utility menu, and create IK constraint. I'll have a link to the universal rig and the IK constraint in the description below, so check there if you want to get them. But I recommend searching it up on the workshop, unless you signed into Steam on your browser. But anyway, yeah, an IK constraint pretty much is just a universal IK rig, but for one limb of your choosing. And this will actually go right into my next bullet point, which is locking, because locking is best if you're using rigs, usually, or if you want someone to hold something. But I got no other props in this session, and I don't feel like spawning in anything, so let's take his hand. And we're going to take his hand, put it next to his head. You might be wondering, what is he going to do with the... SFM, I'm going to beat you. I'm going to beat the devil out of you. We're gonna kind of make him grab his head. Very shoddily, though, because I don't really feel like doing too much for something that's not really going to be animated. But anyway, yeah, he's holding his head. Best you're going to get out of me right now. But anywho, we're gonna grab the mask, wherever that bone is right there. Okay, that is the left hand. And how do you lock a bone? There are two ways you can lock a bone. You can press this little box here. You'll get a little lock right there. And now the bone will move independently. You're not going to have the head bothering everything. The head isn't moving the mask because the mask is locked. But we're not going to be doing that. We're going to be taking the left hand, which is going to be the lock E, and the lock is going to be the mask. So we're going to click, drag, put that over the hand, and then bam. Now you got that. That's how you do locking. And back to IK stuff. A big important thing. Make sure you mess around with the elbow and the knees, because if you got your knees and your elbows like all the way out here, that's where they're gonna point most of the time. IK rigs are weird, man. So yeah, try to animate these accordingly to how you need to use them, or things are just gonna break themselves. And again, I'm sorry. I wish I could do this tutorial a little more justice. It's been 7 months. I knew I was gonna struggle with this, but I wanted to get something out, and I wanted to help to the best of my degree. But anyway, let's move on to the do's and to the don'ts. The do's and the don'ts are what you do and what you don't. I've pretty much gone over some of them, like don't overuse the smooth, don't overuse jitter, because that jitter thing was a joke. But a big thing, you don't want to... Oh god, I didn't plan this far. I'm sorry. But... I got this far into the video, and I didn't think of any do's and any don'ts. Why did I put that bullet point there? Anyway, I just wanted to say I am really sorry for the kind of lackluster tutorial that I was providing now. This is the best I can do. I've been trying at this for about an hour, 2 hours, and I've been struggling to think of how to execute this for months. It's been on my back. Things like this are not my forte to explain. I'm better at more objective things. Like, the next tutorial is going to be on rendering, and those are definite things, like checkboxes and whatnot. I know what to do there. Movement, everybody's got their thing with movement. Once you learn, you kind of just get on from there. And I'm not here trying to teach people how to do my movements. I'm just trying to tell you the basics and do the best that I can. So, I tried my best, and I really apologize for the quality of this tutorial. I tried my best. So, anyway, do's and don'ts. I guess I could just say, don't be afraid to try something that you feel like you'll enjoy. You won't get things on your first try. So, even if you think something's bad, try it again later in the future. Once you've acquired more skill, and maybe you'll get it that time. But don't let a skill wall of yours let you kind of falter, because that's the fall of many animators. They don't think they're good enough, when all you need is time. So, anyway, I hope that this tutorial has been somehow helpful to somebody here. And I guess I will see you guys in the next one, or next time you see me, or whatever. And hopefully that tutorial will be a bit better, to say the least.